I can still smell the expensive wood smoke from the fireplace and the cheap cologne of ambition that hung heavy in Reese's penthouse. It was a perfect, chilly November evening in Chicago, the kind where the skyline view from the 40th floor feels like a diamond bracelet around the city's neck. I was wearing an emerald green dress that Hayes had personally selected and, predictably, never complimented. A silk cage that cost more than my first 2 years of medical school tuition combined. 5 years, 35 pounds of expectation, and countless forced smiles later. This was my life. Elara, the accessory. Hayes had spent the entire elevator ride coaching me, his voice a low, precise instrument of control. Remember, the Whitfields are here. He's M&A, not private equity. Don't confuse that again, Elara. It wasn't a reminder, it was a rehearsal. He treated me like a poorly scripted understudy, worried I might accidentally utter the embarrassing secret that I ran the cardiac surgery unit at Northwestern Memorial, that I had spent 12 hours that very morning saving the life of a 12-year-old boy whose mitral valve was failing. "Just tell them you work at the hospital, honey," he lectured, zipping up the gown behind me without letting his fingertips graze my skin. "These people don't want to hear about blood and procedures over cocktails. It makes them uncomfortable. Stick to light topics. The weather, vacation plans, maybe that new sushi place downtown. The weather." I, Elara, who had navigated 3 years of residency, who spent her days making life-or-death decisions in an environment where precision was God, was relegated to discussing cloud formations with investment bankers who probably couldn't locate their own pulse points without an Apple Watch. My phone had buzzed in my clutch, a quick text from my surgical team, "Boy stable, asking for his baseball glove." That text meant more than every diamond, every label, and every strained smile in that glittering room. But mentioning it would violate the sacred rules of Hayes's carefully constructed performance. Hayes, meanwhile, was doing his own transformation ritual across the room. He was a master of public persona, shoulders back, smile activated, voice dropping to that authoritative baritone that made clients nod like synchronized puppets. The man who stood before me was a stranger, utterly disconnected from the young, eager man who used to wait outside the hospital at 2 a.m. with a lukewarm coffee and a bouquet of grocery store daisies after grueling 16-hour shift. That man had been proud to introduce me as Dr. Elara, my incredibly smart surgeon wife. This man treated my accomplishments like a viral infection that might accidentally contaminate his carefully sanitized social circle. He caught my eye in the mirror and added, "Oh, and the Hamilton fundraiser next month." Reese asked. I told him we'd take the $500,000 table. It's crucial for visibility. A familiar, chilling heat rose in my chest. $500,000, Hayes? You realize the pediatric ward is still waiting on the new monitoring equipment the board deemed too expensive at $300,000? I was going to donate it personally, but he cut me off without turning around, adjusting his cufflink. Our money is already allocated, Elara. We are building an empire, not running a charity. Priorities. I watched him go, expecting me to follow like a well-trained auxiliary tool. He didn't ask if I was ready. He simply assumed my compliance. As we moved through the crowd, his hand settled on my lower back, not out of affection but positioning. It was territorial, marking his possession while simultaneously keeping me at a precise, professional distance. The evening wore on, a dizzying cycle of financial jargon and forced laughter. I stood there, clutching a glass of champagne, feeling increasingly hollow. The music shifted. A slow, romantic jazz piece began, reminding me hauntingly of our wedding reception 5 years prior. A moment of desperate nostalgia, a flicker of the woman who had believed in him, pushed me forward. Hayes was mid-sentence with Bradley and some unnamed client, his hands chopping the air with typical animated swagger. I touched his elbow, the expensive wool of his suit feeling like impenetrable armor. "Dance with me, Hayes," I murmured. It was less an invitation, more a plea, a final test of a dying marriage. His jaw tightened, a small muscle twitching beneath his impeccably groomed beard. He quickly ran the social calculus, interrupting a networking moment versus looking cold in front of colleagues. He chose the path of least resistance. "Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me," he said, his smile tight and utterly devoid of warmth. "Duty calls." The word duty felt like a knife twist. That's all I was now. As we moved mechanically, stiffly, like two strangers following dance instructions, he immediately started talking about the Patterson deal, his eyes scanning the room. Never mind, tracking who was talking to whom. I leaned in, trying to close the vast, aching chasm between us, searching for the ghost of the man I had married. I saw Talia Whitfield giggle as Reese kissed her cheek. I saw Meredith and Owen swaying, lost in their own intimate bubble. I leaned in further, a simple, gentle gesture, attempting a kiss on his lips, the kind married people shared a party, a quiet statement that we're still here, still us. Hayes jerked back violently, his face contorted with genuine, unmasked revulsion. Several people paused and turned. Then, loud enough for the music to falter in the sudden silence, clear enough for everyone to hear, he delivered the blow that would shatter everything. "I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you, Alara." The laughter was immediate, brutal, and cruel. Reese nearly dropped his martini. Talia clapped her hand over her mouth in delighted shock. The sound crashed over me, wave after wave of confirmation. I was the joke. Always had been. But Hayes wasn't finished. The applause from his audience fed the monster. He raised his voice, ensuring the encore was heard by all. "You don't even meet my standards. Stay away from me." My face burned, but a strange, crystalline coldness spread through my veins. The room spun, not from the champagne, but from the sudden, devastating clarity of truth. Every ignored red flag, every dismissed infidelity, every lie about late nights at the office, they all assembled themselves into a parade of evidence. I had been performing CPR on something that had been dead for years, and right there, pinned in the center of their cruel amusement, I stopped being hurt and started becoming calculated. My smile began small, an icy upturn that was neither polite nor diplomatic. It was the smile of a predator that had finally locked onto its prey, and I watched as the laughter around me faltered, then died, like a flame deprived of oxygen. The room fell silent, waiting for my final, broken surrender. But I wasn't broken. "You know what, Hayes?" My voice cut through the silence, steady and clinical, the same tone I used when explaining a terminal diagnosis to a waiting family. "You're absolutely right. I don't meet your standards." His smirk widened, mistaking my agreement for surrender. He thought he had one. He had no idea the game had just started. The silence that followed was so thick I could hear the expensive Venetian glass chandelier humming faintly overhead. It was a silence filled with anticipation, the hushed pause before a bomb drops. Hayes was basking in his victory, his hand resting on Bradley's shoulder like they had just executed a perfect, highly profitable deal. He didn't see the seismic shift that had just occurred inside me. He only saw the years of learned compliance. "Your standards require someone who doesn't know about the Fitzgerald account," I continued, my voice gaining strength. each syllable landing like a surgical instrument on a steel tray. I watched the color drain from Hayes's face. The smugness vanished instantly, replaced by a sudden, frantic fear, the look of a man who realizes the floor beneath him has turned to quicksand. His eyes darted nervously to Bradley, then back to me. What are you talking about? His confident baritone cracked, shrinking his presence in the suddenly cavernous room. I reached into my small, pointless clutch bag. It had contained nothing more than a credit card and a useless lip gloss when I entered. Now it held a weapon. I pulled out my phone, letting its light illuminate the sudden panic in the faces around me. The Fitzgerald account. That, gentlemen, was my father's retirement portfolio. The revelation was met with a chorus of stunned gasps. The Fitzgeralds were old family friends, and my father, a former engineer, had trusted Hayes completely with his life savings. The weight of that betrayal, not just to me, but to the man who helped Hayes secure his first big clients, was immense. I let the cruelty of that fact hang in the air, allowing the vultures around him to taste the rot of their own professional ecosystem. Your standards need someone who hasn't spent the last 3 months documenting every discrepancy in our accounts, I went on, my gaze sweeping the room, holding each gawker accountable. Someone who didn't hire a forensic accountant when she noticed $50,000 moving through shell companies in the Caymans. Hayes took a staggered step back. This is ridiculous, Alara. You're being hysterical. Hysterical. That old standby. The lie men tell to discredit the truth they can't control. I ignored him, my fingers moving across the glass of the phone with deliberate, slow movements. The tension was exquisite, better than any anesthetic. Here's the audit report, I said, turning the screen slightly toward Reese and Talia, who were leaning in like spectators at a car crash. Shell company registration documents. Bank transfers dated the same days you claim to be at critical client conferences that, curiously, you never actually attended. I zeroed in on Bradley, his tanned face now a sickly shade of gray. Owen Bradley. This document, Tuesday, March 15th, 3:47 p.m. Should I play the recording of you two discussing how to destroy evidence before the quarterly review? Bradley sputtered, his hand instinctively reaching for the pocket where his phone would be. You can't do that. I touched the play button. Hayes's voice, tiny but unmistakable, filled the silent room from the phone's speaker. We need to wipe everything before Davidson checks the books, transfer it through the subsidiary, then close it down. Make it look like a client error. Someone, I think it was Reese, dropped a glass. The sound of it shattering against the marble punctuated Hayes's recorded confession with a chilling finality. Reese staggered backward, his eyes wide with horror, suddenly realizing his friend was a predator and he was standing too close to the kill. Your standards, I continued, my voice cutting through the building chaos, also requires someone who doesn't know about Amanda. The name hung in the air. Amanda, the 23-year-old intern from Owen's firm. The one Hayes had been visiting every Thursday, the one who was promised a future that never materialized. Who's Amanda? Meredith's voice was sharp, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Owen, her fiancé, whose face had gone pale and slick with sweat. The 23-year-old intern from Owen's firm, I supplied calmly, watching the dominoes begin their inevitable cascade. Owen's cousin, actually. Funny how these little connections work. Meredith's hand connected with Owen's face before he could stammer a denial. The slap echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. Your cousin? The one you said needed help with her career. I scrolled through my phone again, finding the text screenshots I'd saved like precious evidence. Can't wait to be done with this boring party so I can see you tomorrow. Elara is so desperate, it's embarrassing. And another, my wife is pathetic. She actually thinks I'm working late. Talia, who had moved closer, reading over my shoulder, gasped, "Oh my God." Then she turned to Reese, her voice rising in pitch. "The pills, the missing blue ones from our cabinet. You said you didn't need them, but they kept disappearing." She whirled on Hayes. "You were at our house last week. You used our bathroom." Hayes lunged toward me, his hand reaching for the phone, a desperate animal movement. But years of surgical training had taught me economy of movement and precision. I sidestepped him effortlessly, watching him stumble past, catching himself on a decorative marble table that wobbled violently under his weight. "The Whitman portfolio," I announced to the room, which had devolved into a tableau of frozen horror. "Check your statements, everyone. Really check them. Those spectacular returns Hayes has been showing? Creative mathematics. The money's been siphoned into accounts in Panama. The FBI knows about all of it. You're lying." Hayes screamed, his voice high and desperate. I pulled up one final document on my phone, the confirmation from the federal prosecutor's office. The federal prosecutor's office disagrees. "This is confirmation that arrest warrants will be served Monday morning at your firm, Davidson, Klein and Associates." Agent Leo Patterson thought that timing would be particularly effective. The room erupted into full-scale pandemonium. Reese was shouting about his family's money. Talia was screaming at Reese. Meredith was demanding answers from Owen. Bradley frantically typed on his phone, likely trying to move assets or book a one-way ticket to a non-extradition country. Through the chaos, Hayes stood frozen, his meticulously constructed world collapsing around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time, he was without a script, without a charming deflection, and without an audience ready to laugh at his cruelty. He was just a pathetic, exposed criminal. "Oh, and Hayes," I added, my voice cutting through the noise one last time. "Your mother knows everything. Judith called me last week after her accountant found discrepancies in the pension fund you manage for her. We had a very interesting conversation about where your father's retirement money actually went. That was the last straw." His legs gave out. Hayes sank onto one of Reese's designer chairs, his face buried in his hands. The man who had compared me to a dog 5 minutes ago was now reduced to something small and whimpering, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. The sound of my heels on the marble was the only steady rhythm as I turned toward the door, each step measured and deliberate, walking away from the destruction and toward my freedom. The crowd parted as I walked toward the penthouse door, a sudden river of panicked, whispering faces. Some stared with shock, others with a chilling mix of respect and fear. I had just detonated their social ecosystem, exposing the rot beneath their designer clothes and curated smiles. They were watching the fall of a king, but I was simply walking out of a cage. At the entrance, I turned back one final time. The scene was breathtaking in its destruction. Trust fund kings and queens reduced to screaming, accusatory teenagers. They were fighting over who knew what, whose money was gone, and whose marriage was most profoundly broken. In the center, my husband, no, my soon-to-be ex-husband, Hayes, sat slumped, his entire body language a tableau of utter defeat. He finally understood what it felt like to be stripped bare and humiliated in front of everyone who mattered to him. I pushed through the door and stepped into the quiet hallway. My heels clicked sharply against the marble, a percussive rhythm against the receding chaos. I felt the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving behind a strange, hollow clarity. The elevator arrived with a soft, cheerful chime that seemed criminally inappropriate for the carnage 40 floors above. As I stepped inside, a voice called out behind me, "Hilara, wait." It was Talia Whitfield. She stood in the doorway of the penthouse, her pristine makeup smeared, her designer dress rumpled. In her trembling hand, she clutched a glittering diamond necklace, the piece she had been showing off all evening, bragging about its provenance. "The necklace," she managed, her voice thick and shaky. "Reese said it was bought with the Sherman Trust funds. Was he stealing from that too?" The question was a desperate, grasping hope that her husband wasn't as deep in the filth as mine. I looked at the shimmering stones, devoid of beauty, suddenly nothing more than evidence. "Check the purchase date against the withdrawal records," I said, my tone flat and purely factual. "March 28th, $42,000. You might want to take it off before the asset freeze hits on Monday. They'll consider it evidence." She didn't argue. With a sharp, hysterical yank, she tore the necklace off. The clasp broke, and diamonds scattered across the expensive marble like broken promises. The elevator doors closed slowly, deliberately, on the image of Talia scrambling on her hands and knees to collect the glittering wreckage of her life. Then I was alone. 30 seconds. That's what I gave myself in the small, mirrored space of the descending elevator. 30 seconds to shake. My hands trembled as I gripped the brass rail, my legs suddenly unsteady in heels that had carried me through 12-hour surgeries, but now felt inadequate for this moment. 28, 29, 30. I straightened my spine, pulled out my phone, and typed a single message to my lawyer, Diana. "It's done. Everything is in motion. File the papers Monday morning." The reply was instantaneous security footage. "They'll have it all. Make sure Leo knows." The elevator opened to the opulent lobby. The doorman nodded politely, blissfully unaware of the destruction I had unleashed 40 stories up. Outside, the valet brought my car around. I had driven separately, knowing I would need my own escape route. The drive home through the midnight streets of Chicago was automatic. My muscle memory navigated the familiar route while my mind replayed the sound of Hayes's confession, the slap, the shattering glass. Our house, a sleek, modern glass box in Lincoln Park, stood dark against the streetlights, looking exactly as it had 3 hours ago. But everything had changed. I parked in the garage and sat for a moment, staring at the symbols of Hayes's performance. His set of custom golf clubs, his expensive mountain bike he never rode, the tools in the wall cabinet he'd never opened. Props in a play about a life he wanted people to believe he lived. Inside, I moved with a focused, almost meditative purpose. I went to the storage room and brought up the good boxes, sturdy, clean, the ones we'd saved from our wedding gifts. His framed Harvard diploma came off the wall first. The glass reflected my face back at me. It was pale, but the eyes were clear, surgically focused. Into the box it went, followed by his collection of cufflinks, each pair a gift from clients whose money he'd been systematically stealing. I moved to his closet, suit after tailored suit, each one pristine. His shoes polished and paired. I found the watch his father, a simple man, had given him for graduation. I held it for a moment, remembering Hayes's proud smile as he showed it off. His father, whose pension fund Hayes was now draining. The irony was suffocating. My phone started buzzing continuously. Hayes's name flashed repeatedly. I let it ring. The messages were a desperate torrent. Elara, please let me explain. Then, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. Followed by the whiplash of emotion. You've ruined everything. My whole life. And finally, the attempt at control. I'll make you pay for this. But please come back. We can fix this. The messages, once potent tools of manipulation, were now just evidence of a man scrambling for any handhold as he fell into the abyss. In the bottom drawer of his desk, hidden under a stack of irrelevant tax documents, I found our wedding album. The cover was ivory leather, our initials embossed in gold. Inside, the woman in white smiled back at me, radiant with naive certainty about her future. Hayes stood beside her, his hand on her waist, looking at her like she was everything he had ever wanted. When had that look changed? When had I become an object to be managed rather than a partner to be cherished? Tears came then, hot and stinging, but not for Hayes, or even for the death of our marriage. They were for her, the woman in the white dress, the one who had believed in forever, who had thought love meant something more than performance and possession. I sat on the floor of his office, surrounded by boxes of his life, and cried for the death of her naive faith in happy endings. A sharp, clear bell rang in my mind. This wasn't just about my pain. This was about the network of lies that had victimized not only me, but everyone around him, including his own mother. The personal wreckage was merely the entry point to a much larger crime scene. My phone rang again. My sister, Phoebe. I answered, my voice raw. I saw Talia's Instagram story, Phoebe said without preamble. It cut off mid-scene, but there was screaming. Are you okay? I'm already in the car, I heard myself say. I'll be there in 3 hours. I needed to see my sister, but first I needed to finish clearing the physical presence of Hayes from my life. The apartment needed to be sanitized. The man who had compared me to a dog had to be eradicated from the space where I would begin to breathe again. His suit jackets, his golf clubs, his polished shoes, all packed, ready to be picked up by his lawyer on Monday. The only thing I left on his desk was the official letterhead from the federal prosecutor's office. Face up, a chilling reminder of the appointment he would be keeping at 10 a.m. on Monday morning. Justice was coming, and I was holding the scalpel. This was not merely revenge. This was triage for my soul, and for the souls of those whose lives Hayes had carelessly tried to dismantle. The next morning arrived, gray and quiet, the typical Chicago winter light diffused through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My sister, Phoebe, had arrived at 2 a.m., driving 3 hours from Milwaukee. I had been asleep on the leather couch, the comfortable, oversized one I bought before Hayes, the one he always complained was too soft, too blue, too undignified for his aesthetic. She found me there, surrounded by the remnants of the boxes, covered me with a blanket, and started brewing coffee. The rich, familiar smell pulled me out of restless dreams filled with shattering diamonds and echoing laughter. You have a meeting, Phoebe said, handing me a steaming mug. She had an aura of calm efficiency, a trait I'd always admired and relied on. Leo Patterson, 9 a.m. Cafe Luna. I had forgotten. In the adrenaline-fueled hours of destruction and packing, the crucial meeting with the assistant federal prosecutor had slipped my mind. Phoebe, bless her heart, had not only remembered, but had also mapped the route. I told him I'd meet you at the hospital later, she added, already on her knees rearranging the living room furniture. She was pushing Hayes's offensively modern, minimalist chair out into the garage and centering my beloved blue couch, reclaiming the space one physical object at a time. He hated this couch, I murmured, sinking gratefully into its soft cushions. I know, Phoebe said simply. Remember when he made you skip Dad's 70th birthday last year? Said it was a critical client dinner. I nodded, the disappointment in my father's voice when I called to cancel still a bitter memory. I saw Instagram photos that night, Phoebe continued, her voice low. He was at some exclusive club opening with that crowd. No clients, just champagne and people who weren't you. We sat in a comfortable, healing silence, two sisters who had drifted apart during my marriage, now finding their way back through the shared trauma of betrayal. Phoebe pulled out her laptop, and together we began to make lists. Lawyer appointments, financial advisors, therapy referrals, and most importantly, practical steps toward a life that would be mine alone. The sheer mundanity of the tasks, changing utility bills, updating bank accounts, was a strange form of grounding. I arrived at Café Luna exactly at 8:58 a.m. Leo Patterson was already there, sitting in a corner booth with clear sight lines to both exits. Habits of the profession, I supposed. He was professional but not unkind, and he stood when he saw me. Mrs. Hartley. Soon to be Ms. Morrison again, he corrected himself with a slight, respectful nod. I slid the USB drive across the table. 3 years of comprehensive evidence compressed into a device smaller than my thumb. My mother noticed it first, I explained. She's a retired accountant, does our taxes as a favor. Small discrepancies that didn't match our reported income. That's when I started documenting everything. Leo reviewed the files on his laptop, his expression growing serious with each document. This is comprehensive. With what you revealed Friday night and this documentation, we have enough for federal charges. Hayes's assets will be frozen by noon today. Reese Whitfield and Owen Coleman are now also under investigation. And my immunity agreement? I asked, needing absolute confirmation. Ironclad, Leo affirmed. You were unaware of the criminal activity when it began. You reported it as soon as you discovered it, and you're cooperating fully. You are protected, Alara. Back home, Phoebe was still working magic, having pushed Hayes's entire collection of props, golf clubs, bike, diplomas, suits, into the garage ready for collection. She had replaced the framed Harvard degree with a framed photo of me at my own graduation, draped in a surgical gown, looking exhausted but fiercely triumphant. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected wash of sunshine streaming through the hospital windows. Phoebe had left for Milwaukee at dawn, promising to return next weekend. I drove to Northwestern Memorial on autopilot, my mind compartmentalized between the surgery ahead and the knowledge of what was happening downtown. The patient was Caleb, a 17-year-old basketball player from Lincoln Park High, who had collapsed during practice with an undetected heart defect. His parents sat in the waiting room, holding hands with the same desperate hope I had seen hundreds of times before. I focused on their faces as I explained the procedure, using their fear to anchor myself in this moment, this purpose. This was the life that existed separate from the destruction unfolding in downtown offices. In the operating room, my team assembled with practiced efficiency. Dr. Lee, my senior resident, studied the monitors. Sarah, my favorite surgical nurse, laid out instruments with methodical precision. They moved around me like a well-rehearsed orchestra, unaware their conductor was internally tracking time, knowing that at exactly 10 a.m., FBI agents would be walking into Davidson, Klein, and Associates. Scalpel, I said, my voice steady through the surgical mask. The weight of the instrument in my hand felt like truth, like something real and purposeful. Here, in this sterile room with its controlled environment and clear objectives, I could save a life. Meanwhile, another life, the one I had built with Hayes, officially ended. The surgery stretched into its third hour. Dr. Lee commented on my unusual calm. "You're different today, Dr. Morrison. More focused somehow." If only he knew that every precise cut, every careful suture, was a meditation against imagining Hayes's face when the agents entered that conference room. The partner meeting always started at 10 sharp. Davidson would be mid-presentation about quarterly projections when the doors would open. The arrests would be public, visible, impossible to spin or explain away. For hours in, we encountered unexpected scar tissue from an old sports injury the boy hadn't mentioned. I worked through it methodically, rerouting vessels with the same patience I'd used to document 3 years of financial crimes. Every challenge in this surgery could be solved with skill and persistence. Unlike marriages built on lies, hearts could actually be repaired. 7 hours and 14 minutes after the first incision, I closed the final suture. The boy's heart beat strong and steady on the monitors, a rhythm that would carry him through decades of games and graduations and all the life Hayes had tried to steal from retirees whose pensions he'd plundered. "Beautiful work," Dr. Lee said as we scrubbed out. "That kid's going to play college ball because of you." I peeled off my surgical cap, my hair damp with perspiration, and checked my phone. 17 missed calls. 3 from numbers I didn't recognize, likely reporters. The rest from various partners at Hayes's former firm. The news had broken, and now the reckoning truly began. My own survival was secured, but the greater battle, the one for justice for the vulnerable, was just warming up. I was barely settled in my office, still wearing my scrubs, when I heard the sharp, hesitant knock on my open door. I looked up. Standing there was Talia Whitfield. Gone was the perfectly coiffed woman from Friday night's party. Her designer clothes, the ones Hayes had often praised, were replaced with a simple sundress, and her face was bare of makeup, save for streaks of dried mascara that suggested she'd been crying in her car. She looked small, uncertain, and utterly defeated. "Can I come in, Alara?" Her voice was thin, unfamiliar. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat carefully, as if she might break something, perhaps herself. The silence between us, once filled with the tension of social one-upmanship, was now heavy with the shared weight of disaster. "Reese was arrested an hour ago," she finally said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "They came to the house, the FBI. They had a warrant. They took everything. Computers, files, even our phones. I had to borrow my neighbor's cell just to make calls." She paused, taking a ragged breath. "Our accounts are frozen. All of them. Even my personal checking account from before we married. I can't access anything." A hollow, broken laugh escaped her. "I went to 3 ATMs trying to get cash for gas. The girl at the bank looked at me with such pity when she explained the federal hold." "I'm sorry you're going through this, Talia," I said, and I meant it. Whatever Talia's faults, her superficiality, her participation in the social cruelty, she hadn't orchestrated the crimes. She was merely collateral damage, another victim of the system Hayes and Reese had built. She looked up sharply, her eyes red-rimmed. "Are you?" The raw honesty of the question hung in the air. "Because I laughed, Alara. Friday night, when Hayes said those things to you, I laughed. I've laughed at you for years. Every party, every gathering. We all did. We called you the Ice Queen, the robot surgeon who didn't know how to have fun. The confession hung between us like an unclean scalpel waiting to cut. And the whole time," she continued, tears finally falling freely, "the whole time, Reese was stealing from his own father, from clients who trusted him. He had affairs, multiple affairs. There's apparently a whole separate credit card I never knew about. The FBI agent asked me about trips to Vegas I didn't even know happened. She pulled a tissue from a purse that was definitely not a designer bag, a plain canvas tote. I was so busy feeling superior to you, laughing at your marriage, that I never looked at my own. We were living the exact same lie, except you were smart enough to see it. My desk phone rang. I let it go to voicemail, but the display showed a name that made Talia flinch. Davidson, Klein and Associates. They're all calling me, I explained. Former colleagues of Hayes's. Some are fishing for information, trying to figure out their exposure. Others are trying to distance themselves, make sure I know they had no idea what was happening. Did they, though? Talia asked, the question laced with bitter cynicism. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Meredith, Owen's fiancée. Dr. Morrison, I wanted you to know that we all knew about Amanda. About the others, too. I'm sorry we never said anything. Hayes used to brag about it at happy hours. Said you were too focused on work to notice. Said he was planning to leave once the Singapore deal closed. I kept documentation if you need it for the divorce proceedings. I showed Talia the message. She read it twice, her face crumpling. They all knew, she whispered. At every party, every dinner, they all knew our husbands were destroying us for sport. My phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number. Judith Hartley, Hayes's mother. I had been dreading this call, but I knew I had to take it. I should take this, I told Talia. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Her voice, though still small, had found a core of steel. Elara, that strength they mocked you for? Don't lose it. It's the only reason you're still standing while the rest of us are falling apart. I picked up the line. Judith's voice, decades of Southern breeding still crisp, barely concealed a raw emotion I had never heard from her before. Elara, I owe you an apology. Not hello, not how are you, straight to the point like always. I've been a terrible mother-in-law. I disapproved of your career, thought you should focus on giving me grandchildren, criticized you for not supporting Hayes's ambitions properly. I said nothing, letting her continue. I hired an investigator 6 months ago, she confessed, her voice shaking slightly. The pension account irregularities were too obvious to ignore. I know everything. The affairs, the stealing, the lies. A pause, then a chilling conviction. I've already spoken to the federal prosecutor. I'll testify against my own son if necessary. This was the shocking twist I hadn't fully processed. Judith's complete, unwavering betrayal of her own blood for the sake of integrity and justice. She was a woman from an old money family, someone who valued her reputation above all else. This was devastating to her. Eleanor, I began, using her first name for the first time. Hayes was trying to transfer the house into my name. Did you know? To hide assets from potential lawsuits. The paperwork was drawn up, but never filed. He must have gotten distracted by his own scheming. I know, she confirmed, a deep sigh passing over the line. He erased himself better than this. His father, God rest his soul, would be devastated. She then gave me a final, critical piece of information. There are more victims, Elara. Check the accounts he opened under the subsidiary name Oak Hill Investments. Look for small, recurring, private investments. A lot of teachers and retired nurses use that fund. They're the ones who will lose everything. Judith's focus wasn't on her own loss, but on the small, forgotten victims, the elderly, the trusting. It was a new facet of her character, forged in the heat of her son's betrayal. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. Oak Hill Investments. Small, recurring, private. The $300,000 I wanted for the pediatric equipment now felt insignificant next to the true scale of Hayes's cruelty. This was no longer just a personal divorce. It was a crusade for the forgotten. I had secured my own freedom, but now I had a duty to those whose lives were truly threatened by Hayes's selfish standards. The triage on my soul was complete. The focus now shifted to large-scale disaster relief. 3 months had passed since the arrests. Autumn had given way to the brutal, gray heart of a Chicago winter. The skyline outside my office window a study in stark, chilling architecture. I was sitting in my newly reclaimed home office, the one Hayes had refused to enter because it was too cluttered with medical journals, composing an email to Malcolm Chin, a financial blogger whose readership included every major firm in the city. The subject line read simply, "Documentation you should see." The attachments included court filings, arrest records, and a detailed, easy-to-read timeline of the fraud that I'd compiled with my lawyer, Diana's blessing. Every document was public record, but scattered across different databases. I was simply consolidating them into one devastating, easily searchable package that would appear first whenever anyone searched Hayes's name for the next decade. This was the final nail in the coffin of his reputation, a permanent scar on his professional history. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Yes, that Amanda, Hayes's 23-year-old intern mistress. We'd been in contact since I'd connected her with a sharp attorney named Patricia. Amanda, it turned out, was a victim too. Promised a dream career, manipulated, and now 7 months pregnant, rebuilding her life with her parents back in Iowa. Lawsuit filed this morning. Her text read, "Emotional distress and pregnancy discrimination. Patricia says the timing with your document release is perfect. Thank you, Alara. I'd never expected to become allies with my husband's mistress. But Amanda had been just another chess piece to Hayes. Seeing her take back her power, filing a lawsuit that would publicly expose his predatory workplace behavior, gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. It was a shared mission, exposing the man behind the mask. That evening, I attended the Chicago Children's Hospital Charity Gala. It was the same event where I'd met Hayes 6 years ago. Back then, I'd been the promising young surgeon he'd pursued. Now, I walked in alone, my presence creating ripples of whispered conversations throughout the ballroom. "Ilara, darling, how brave of you to come." Margaret Whitestone approached, her smile tight with curiosity, her eyes filled with the same morbid fascination that drove people to watch public executions. "Brave," I replied, accepting a champagne flute from a passing server. "The children's ward needs support regardless of personal circumstances, Margaret. Courage is fighting for the helpless, not attending a party." Throughout the evening, I watched the social choreography unfold. Hayes's former colleagues clustered in corners, their bodies angled away from anyone tainted by the scandal. Reese's former clients moved through the room like refugees, scrambling to establish new, untainted alliances while their frozen assets left them scrambling for cash. Near the silent auction tables, I overheard Owen's wife, Meredith, speaking to a small group of women. We had no idea, of course. Owen barely knew Hayes outside of work functions. I activated the recording app on my phone, holding it casually at my side. "Please," another woman laughed, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Owen was at every boys' night. Remember that Vegas trip last year? My husband said they were practically celebrating something." Now we know what. The Singapore deal, Meredith admitted, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Owen mentioned it once. Said Hayes had found a creative solution to the funding problem. We should have known creative meant illegal. These small admissions, these acknowledgments of willful blindness or passive complicity, were crucial building blocks for a larger structure of accountability. My lawyer would be very interested in Meredith's confirmation of Owen's prior knowledge of the Singapore deal. 2 weeks later, Meredith Coleman herself contacted me. Owen's wife had discovered her own cache of evidence, recordings, emails, and wanted to compare notes. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Lincoln Park, two women bound by the peculiar sisterhood of betrayal. He recorded everything, Meredith said, sliding a USB drive across the table. He had this app on his phone that automatically recorded calls, including ones with Hayes. The recordings were damning. Conversations about moving money, discussions about other accounts they targeted, and jokes about their wives being too stupid or too trusting to notice. In one particularly chilling exchange, they laughed about a retired third-grade teacher whose entire pension they had drained. Her name was Martha, Meredith said, tears welling up. Taught third grade for 40 years. They took everything. That conversation led to a revelation that shifted the entire dynamic of my crusade. Meredith had been contacted by 5 other women, all connected to the scandal in various ways. Wives of co-conspirators and other victims whose husbands' retirement accounts had been plundered. We organized a meeting at my house the following week. 7 women, ranging in age from 23, Amanda's representative as she couldn't travel, to 68, gathered in my living room on a Thursday evening. We were united by our connection to this web of financial crime and emotional violence. There was Margaret, whose husband's entire 401k had vanished. There was Patricia, whose husband had been Bradley's partner before the firm collapsed. There was Linda, who discovered her husband had been facilitating the money laundering. We're not just victims, I said, opening the meeting, addressing them not as broken wives, but as formidable witnesses. We're witnesses. We have information that can expand this investigation and ensure everyone involved is held accountable. Margaret, a sharp, older woman, nodded firmly. I've been documenting everything for months. My husband thought I didn't understand finance because I taught elementary school. He was wrong. Over wine and carefully organized evidence folders, we built our case. Each woman contributed a piece. Recorded conversations, suspicious documents, financial records that didn't add up. Patricia had emails showing the crime went back 5 years. Linda had photographs of meetings that were supposedly never held. They thought we were decorations, Linda said, her voice steady with controlled anger. Pretty things to display at parties while they built their empires on theft. They never imagined we were paying attention. By the end of that evening, we had enough additional evidence to expand the federal investigation significantly. Our group chat became a command center for accountability, each woman committed to ensuring that justice reached beyond just the primary conspirators. They were a sisterhood forged in fire, determined to protect future victims, especially those who, like Martha, had spent their lives in service only to be devoured by greed in their final years. The strength I gained from that Thursday night meeting, the formation of our unlikely coalition, was immense. We called ourselves the Watchdogs, and our focus was razor sharp, not merely seeing Hayes and his accomplices punished, but ensuring restitution and justice for the secondary victims, particularly the elderly who had lost their security. The story of Martha, the retired third-grade teacher who lost her life savings to the Oak Hill Investments fraud, became our rallying cry. As I cleaned up after everyone left, I found a sticky note Meredith had left on my kitchen counter, tucked beneath an empty wine glass. It read, "They called us trophy wives. Let's show them what trophies are really made of. Solid gold. And impossible to break." I tucked that note into my kitchen drawer, a small, powerful reminder of the solidarity we'd built from shared devastation. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings had begun 2 weeks earlier, and Hayes, ever the narcissist, arrived with a legal strategy breathtaking in its audacity. His attorney argued that my substantial surgical income should be factored into the settlement, claiming my earnings should offset his client's current inability to work due to the criminal proceedings. "Your Honor," Hayes's attorney stated, preening for the court, "Dr. Morrison earned over $400,000 last year. Mr. Hartley's career has been destroyed by allegations that—" My attorney, Diana, a woman who specialized in dismantling entitled men, interrupted smoothly. "Not allegations, Your Honor. Charges, based on evidence Dr. Morrison provided after discovering her husband's criminal activity." Diana then produced a slim folder that made Hayes visibly pale. "We've discovered cryptocurrency wallets in Mr. Hartley's name, containing approximately $200,000 in Bitcoin, purchased over the last 18 months. Additionally, there's an art collection valued at $300,000, stored in a climate-controlled facility in Schaumburg under his mother's name, but paid for with marital assets." Hayes's face was a roadmap of shock and fury. He had thought his digital tracks were safe, never imagining that my forensic team was as meticulous as my surgical team. Each revelation was another cut, precise and calculated, exposing the hidden wealth he intended to keep while painting himself as a helpless victim of circumstance. Hayes's attorney scrambled to respond, but Diana wasn't finished. "There is also the matter of the boat registration in Michigan, the investment property in Wisconsin he never disclosed, and the safety deposit box at First National containing gold coins and bearer bonds. All assets accumulated using funds siphoned from client accounts." By the end of that hearing, Hayes's position had crumbled entirely. He would leave the marriage with only the clothes on his back, a monumental debt for his criminal defense fees, and the inescapable knowledge that I had been 3 steps ahead of him at all times. He who tried to control my finances and minimize my career was now financially ruined by the surgeon wife he had underestimated. Our focus, then, shifted to the bigger picture, the criminal case. The evidence provided by the watchdogs was instrumental. Meredith's recorded calls revealed a direct chain of command leading beyond Hayes to 2 senior partners who had previously avoided scrutiny. Linda's photographic evidence proved that social dinners were in fact illicit strategy meetings. I contacted Leo Patterson, the assistant federal prosecutor, personally. "Leo, we have information regarding Oak Hill Investments. We believe this was a specific funnel for small, long-term investors, retirees, teachers, people who won't have the resources to fight this in civil court." I told him about Martha, the 3rd-grade teacher. The simple fact of her decades of service, only to be robbed of her security, resonated deeply with Leo. He was a man of the law, but he was also a man of decency. The systematic targeting of vulnerable individuals that elevates the charges, Leo confirmed. That shows intent and malice. It makes for a very compelling case to demand maximum sentencing and full restitution for those particular accounts. The sheer scope of Hayes's betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just the millions stolen from the rich and powerful. They could absorb the loss. It was the calculated, cruel theft from people like Martha, who had spent their entire working lives contributing to society. Hayes had taken her comfort, her dignity, and her peace of mind in her final years. That was the theft that had no restitution amount. My personal vengeance had evolved into a social responsibility. My skill set, precision, patience, and the ability to cut away the cancerous part to save the whole was now being applied to the justice system. The scorned wife was now a formidable advocate, not just for herself, but for a whole class of unseen victims. 9 months had passed since that first gathering at Reese's penthouse. Today, we would all sit together again, but this time in a federal courtroom for Hayes' sentencing. The courthouse stood against a harsh February sky, its limestone columns looking like bars already. I arrived early, wanting to review my victim impact statement one final time. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, not from fear, but from the immense weight of speaking for so many who had been silenced by shame and confusion. The vow to Martha was about to be fulfilled. The courtroom filled gradually, a stark contrast to the glittering chaos of the penthouse party. Here, the atmosphere was one of somber gravity, not drunken amusement. Judith, Hayes' mother, arrived first, wearing a severe black suit. Her face was composed, but the lines around her eyes were deeper, aged by months of processing the reality of the son she had raised. She caught my eye, gave a subtle nod that conveyed both regret and quiet solidarity, and took a seat far in the front row. Behind her, the other women from our group filed in. Margaret, Patricia, Linda, Meredith, and 3 others who had joined us as the investigation widened. Amanda, too close to her due date to travel, had sent her own powerful written statement for the judge to review. We were no longer just a collection of individuals. We were a physical presence, a collective testament to the scale of the betrayal. When the bailiffs brought Hayes in, the change was startling. The orange jumpsuit had replaced his tailored suits, and federal custody had worn away his carefully maintained exterior. He had lost weight. His face was gaunt. The confidence that once commanded rooms was reduced to something hollow and pathetic. His eyes searched the gallery until they found mine, holding my gaze for a moment, a fleeting, desperate look of terror and hatred, before I deliberately looked away, focusing on the judge. Ms. Morrison, the prosecutor, Leo Patterson, addressed me when my turn came. You may deliver your statement. I stood, my heels clicking against the courtroom floor with the same measured rhythm they'd had leaving Reese's penthouse that night. The podium felt solid under my hands, a steady anchor in a churning world. Your Honor, I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified slightly by the microphone. I'm not here only to talk about the money Caleb stole, though the financial damage extends to dozens of families. I'm here to talk about the theft that doesn't show up in financial records, the systematic destruction of trust, disguised as a marriage. Hayes shifted in his seat, his shackles making a small, metallic sound that seemed to mock his former bravado. For 5 years, I was married to a man who treated cruelty as entertainment, who would publicly humiliate me at social gatherings, then gaslight me into believing I was too sensitive when I objected. I found receipts hidden in his home office, jewelry, designer handbags, spa treatments, gifts purchased but never given, kept as trophies of deception while he told me we needed to budget more carefully. Judith made a small, choked sound, pressing a tissue to her eyes. Those same receipts were filed with documentation for Amanda Harrison's apartment, I continued, ensuring the court understood the level of calculation. As if betrayal was just another business expense to be categorized and filed. He kept spreadsheets, Your Honor. Actual spreadsheets, tracking his lies, his affairs, his stolen money with the same precision he used to track our household expenses, while telling me my surgical equipment purchases were excessive. I looked directly at Hayes then, watching him shrink into himself. At a party in front of colleagues and friends, he told me he'd rather kiss his dog than kiss me, that I didn't meet his standards. That room laughed while my marriage, publicly ended, turned into entertainment for people who knew about his affairs, his theft, his complete moral bankruptcy, but said nothing because it was more fun to watch me not know. The judge leaned forward slightly, his expression grave. The financial crimes destroyed retirements and futures, but the emotional violence he wielded destroyed something deeper. The ability to trust, to feel safe in your own home, to believe that love means something more than performance and possession. He didn't just steal money. He stole years of my life, my confidence, my faith in partnership. That theft has no restitution amount. I returned to my seat as others gave their statements. Martha, the retired teacher, spoke next. She was frail, using a cane, but her voice was strong with quiet dignity. She described losing her entire pension, the decades of service rendered meaningless by a few keystrokes from a greedy man. She spoke not with anger, but with profound sorrow for the lost years of security. Reese Whitfield's father, a distinguished gentleman, described the betrayal of trusting his son's best friend. Amanda's written statement, read aloud by Leo Patterson, detailed workplace predation and abandoned promises. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried the full weight of everything he'd heard. Mr. Hartley, the federal guidelines suggest 5 years for your financial crimes. However, the aggravating factors here, the breach of fiduciary trust, the exploitation of marital assets, the systematic nature of your deception, and the predatory targeting of vulnerable investors like Ms. Pui warrant a severe departure from those guidelines. The gavel came down with chilling finality. I sentence you to 7 years in federal prison. As the guards prepared to lead him away, Hayes turned toward me, mouthing words that looked like, "I'm sorry." But I was already turning away, reaching for Meredith's hand, then Margaret's, creating a chain of women who had survived similar devastation and found strength in shared truth. Justice had been served, but the rebuilding was far from over. It was time to focus on the future, a future Hayes could no longer contaminate. The immediate aftermath of the sentencing was a swirl of reporters, camera flashes, and the satisfying murmur of public accountability. We moved quickly, Leo Patterson guiding us through a side exit away from the media frenzy. My focus was on Martha and the other elderly victims, ensuring they were connected with the Victim Compensation Fund representatives immediately. The legal victory was one thing. Securing their financial future was another entirely. As we stood outside the courthouse, the cold February air biting at our faces, Judith approached me. She looked diminished, yet strangely at peace, as if a long-held burden had been lifted. "Elara, what you said in there," she began, her voice a low, rough whisper. "I never truly understood what he put you through. The emotional violence. I failed you as a mother-in-law, criticizing your career, pushing you toward a life I thought was appropriate. And I'm deeply sorry." Judith, the matriarch, was offering a genuine, complete apology, not just for her son's actions, but for her own complicity in the culture of condescension and control. It was a rare, powerful moment of humility. "Thank you, Judith," I replied, my voice softening. "I appreciate that. We all make mistakes when we're blinded by love, or in my case, by the hope of partnership." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a simple manila envelope. "This is the final report from my investigator. It details all the transactions he ran through my late husband's foundation before I caught him. More importantly, it lists 3 more accounts he used to hide cash. Small ones, mostly overseas, probably for his quick escapes. I've given Leo a copy, but I wanted you to have one. Use it to ensure that every last cent is tracked down for restitution, especially for Martha. The focus on Martha was a significant shift. Judith, a woman who once worried only about the social standing of her family, was now driven by a clear moral compass. Her actions spoke volumes. She was actively joining the side of the victims, even if it meant ensuring her son's ruin was absolute. "We're thinking of starting a foundation," I told her, glancing at Margaret, who nodded enthusiastically. "Focused on financial literacy and legal aid for elderly victims of complex fraud. People like Martha, who don't have the resources to fight these huge firms." Judith's eyes lit up with unexpected fervor. "I want in. I have the contacts, the network. I can get the seed money. I can get you the press you need to be taken seriously. I want my husband's legacy, the clean, honest part, to be what survives, not Hayes's corruption." The unburdening of Judith was complete. She walked away that afternoon with a new, fierce purpose, connected to the women her son had sought to destroy. The chain of women, forged in fire, had just gained its most influential link. That evening, my apartment filled with the same women who'd gathered months earlier, but the atmosphere had shifted from grief to something resembling hope. Meredith arrived with champagne purchased with funds from Owen's recently seized assets, a detail that made us all smile grimly. We were celebrating not Hayes's imprisonment, but our own survival and collective triumph. "To justice," Margaret raised her glass. "To survival," Patricia added, her eyes sparkling. "To never being silent again," Linda concluded. We shared updates on our new lives. Meredith was back in school, pursuing the law degree she'd abandoned when Owen convinced her they didn't need 2 careers. Margaret, true to her word, had begun the paperwork for the foundation, naming Martha as the first honorary director. Patricia was dating again, slowly, carefully, but with a cautious, genuine hope. I got a letter from Amanda, the former intern. I announced it, pulling it from my purse. The others gathered around as I read aloud. She was 8 months pregnant now, planning to raise the child alone with her parents' support. She was also writing a book about predatory workplace relationships, asking if I'd write the foreword. "I want to call it Standards," her letter explained, "because men like Hayes always talk about standards while having none themselves." The bitter irony wasn't lost on any of us. As the evening wound down and the women began leaving, each departure was accompanied by long embraces and promises to maintain our monthly dinners. We had become an unlikely family, bonded by betrayal but defined by our fierce resilience. Meredith was the last to leave, pausing at my door. "You know what struck me most about your statement today, Alara? You didn't just expose what he did. You exposed who he really was. There's something profoundly powerful about that kind of truth." After she left, I stood at my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere in federal holding, Hayes was beginning his 7-year sentence. Somewhere in Iowa, Amanda was preparing for motherhood. Somewhere in this city, other women were living with similar secrets, similar shame. I thought about the woman I'd been at Reese's party, standing frozen while strangers laughed at my humiliation. She felt like someone I'd known once, but could barely remember now. In her place stood someone harder, perhaps, but also clearer. Someone who understood that real strength wasn't about enduring cruelty, but about exposing it completely and without apology. Hayes's cruelty hadn't broken me. It had broken the shell I didn't know I was living in. His public rejection had forced me to reject the life I'd been accepting, the diminishment I'd been normalizing, the cage I'd been decorating instead of escaping. Exactly 1 year. 1 year had passed since that night. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Reese Whitfield's former penthouse, casting long shadows across marble floors that had witnessed my public humiliation. The space was utterly empty now, stripped of all the designer furniture and pretense. Reese's family had declared bankruptcy, and the property was in the hands of the trustee. The realtor, an energetic woman named Beth, who clearly knew nothing of the space's dark history, gestured enthusiastically at the spectacular view of Lake Michigan. "The seller is highly motivated, Dr. Morrison. The bankruptcy trustees want this sold quickly at half the original purchase price. It's an incredible opportunity." I walked to the exact spot where I had stood, frozen, while Hayes compared me to his dog. I ran my hand along the cold glass of the terrace door. The space where couples had danced was vast and echoing now. It looked smaller somehow, less intimidating, stripped of the layers of power and deceit that had once filled it. "The maintenance fees are reasonable for a property of this caliber," Beth continued, checking her tablet. "And with your pre-approval amount, which is, frankly, exceptional, you could easily—" "I'll pass," I said quietly, surprising even myself with the certainty in my voice. Beth looked genuinely confused. "But you haven't even seen the master suite or the private elevator access. It's the pinnacle of Chicago real estate. I don't need to own this space to know I've already conquered it," I replied, turning from the window. I took one last, long look at the empty room. Some victories don't require possession. Sometimes walking away is the real triumph. I didn't need to transform that penthouse into something else. My transformation had already happened without needing to claim that particular piece of real estate. I refused to let it become a trophy of my vengeance. As the elevator descended, I felt lighter with each floor we passed. The weight of that night, the humiliation, the sheer desperation for validation, had evaporated. I hadn't just survived the destruction of a marriage. I had emerged from a cocoon of professional self-doubt and personal minimization. 2 weeks later, my article appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine. The title was purposefully provocative: "When Success Blinds, High Achievement Professionals and Intimate Partner Deception." The article examined how career-focused individuals, particularly in demanding fields like medicine and law, often missed and rationalized clear signs of emotional and financial abuse in their personal relationships. I used anonymized case studies, including my own, which I hinted at with clinical precision, to demonstrate how predatory partners exploit professional success as a shield. They convince the victim that their own focus and high standards are the reason for the abuse, thus ensuring the victim remains silent out of shame. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My hospital email filled with messages from other doctors, lawyers, and executives, mostly women, but some men too, sharing their own stories of how professional success had made them targets for predatory partners who saw achievement as something to exploit rather than admire. Harvard Medical School reached out first, inviting me to speak at their conference on physician wellness. Then Stanford, then Johns Hopkins, dozens of institutions, each engagement revealing the same pattern. Accomplished professionals so focused on saving the world that they'd explained away red flags as stress, dismissed cruelty as tough love, and rationalized exploitation as partnership. "Your article saved my marriage," a young resident told me after a talk in Boston. "Not because it helped me fix it, but because it helped me realize there was nothing left to fix. I'd been performing CPR on something that died years ago. That phrase, performing CPR on something already dead, had resonated with so many readers that it became the unofficial title of my lecture series. It was the simple, heartbreaking truth of living with a lie. My technical expertise, honed over years of saving human hearts, was now being used to save human lives from emotional and financial devastation. The focus remained on protecting the vulnerable, especially those nearing retirement who often fell prey to the false promises of a successful spouse or partner. I was no longer just a cardiac surgeon. I was a voice of expertise and authority on a silent epidemic. Hayes's attempt to erase my identity had inadvertently given me a platform exponentially larger than any he had ever commanded. He wanted me to discuss the weather. I was now discussing the fundamental, structural integrity of high-powered relationships across the country. And the irony, the sweet, satisfying irony, was that he was precisely the case study I used to illustrate the pathology of narcissistic financial abuse. 3 months after the article's publication, I flew home to Milwaukee to celebrate my father's 70th birthday. It was a sun-drenched day in my parents' backyard, a sprawling, comfortable space filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and my mother's meticulously tended rose bushes. The same family members who'd attended my disastrous wedding to Hayes were here, but the atmosphere was lighter, cleaner. No one was pretending anymore. "I never liked him," my Aunt Patricia announced after her 3rd glass of wine. His handshake was too firm, like he was trying to prove something. "You said he seemed charming," my mother reminded her, smiling. "I said his teeth were very white," Aunt Patricia corrected. "That's not the same thing." Everyone laughed, a genuine, hearty sound. And I realized this was the first family gathering where Hayes's absence felt like a presence worth celebrating rather than avoiding. It was the presence of relief. "Elara, dear," my father called out, waving me over. "Come here. There's someone I want you to meet properly." Standing near the edge of the garden, looking surprisingly relaxed in jeans and a casual button-down shirt instead of his usual federal prosecutor attire, was Leo Patterson. "Your father invited me," Leo explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "He said I needed to try your mother's famous potato salad before I could claim to truly understand the Midwest." And I asked, arching an eyebrow. "Life-changing," he admitted, giving a slight, lawyerly shrug. "I may need the recipe for evidence." My father beamed, clearly pleased with his attempt at matchmaking, despite my repeated explanations that Leo and I were simply friends, forged in the trenches of a federal investigation. We had developed an unexpected, profound friendship built on mutual respect and shared morality, rather than any romantic undertones. "Judith called yesterday," Leo mentioned quietly while my father got distracted by the arrival of my sister Phoebe's children. Hayes is appealing his sentence. Says the 7 years is excessive and based on vindictive testimony. "Let him," I said, watching my mother fuss over the grandchildren. "Appeals require new evidence. All he has are the same old lies, just in a different order." What my family didn't understand, what most people didn't, was how valuable this friendship with Leo and, crucially, my new bond with Judith had become. Judith, Margaret, and I had successfully launched the Martha Puey Foundation for Financial Dignity. Named after the retired teacher who lost her pension, the foundation provided pro bono legal counsel and financial education to elderly victims of investment fraud, specifically targeting the predatory schemes often missed by major watchdogs. Judith used her wealth and contacts to secure major grants, Margaret, the former elementary school teacher, designed the financial literacy curriculum, making complex concepts simple and accessible, and I provided the public platform, using my speaking engagements to raise awareness and donations. The impact was immediate. Within 6 months, the foundation had recovered over $1.5 million for 22 elderly clients across 3 states. Martha herself, now an honorary consultant, used her regained funds to buy a small cottage in rural Michigan, finally securing the quiet, dignified retirement that Hayes had tried to steal from her. Her gratitude, expressed in a heartfelt, handwritten card, was the most profound reward I had ever received, surpassing any surgical triumph. Leo, meanwhile, often sought my opinion on cases involving financial crimes against spouses, treating me as an equal expert. He never once suggested that my strength was intimidating or my success was excessive. He saw the fire that Hayes had lit, and he respected its power. 6 months later, I stood in my operating room, preparing for one of the most delicate surgeries of my career. Senator Rebecca Walsh's 17-year-old daughter needed a complex valve repair, the kind of procedure that required absolute precision and a calm, unwavering focus. 7 hours later, I emerged from surgery to find the senator waiting, tears streaming down her face. "You saved her life, Elara," she said, gripping my hands. "How can I ever repay you?" "I was doing my job, Senator," I replied, the standard, practiced response I gave to every grateful parent. "No," she said firmly, her voice regaining its political steel. "This is more than a job. This is a gift. Have you ever considered healthcare policy? I'm forming a committee on medical access reform. We need voices like yours, people who understand both the human cost and the practical realities." I thought about the offer over the following weeks. It would mean less time in surgery, more time in Washington, less direct healing, more systemic change. It was the kind of prestige and proximity to power that Hayes would have killed for. But I wasn't Hayes. I didn't need external validation to know my worth anymore. The old me might have hesitated, worried about the time commitment, the risk to my carefully built surgical career. But the new me understood that power came not from titles, but from influence, the ability to affect real, widespread change, especially for the communities that relied on public and accessible health care. My goal was no longer just to repair one heart at a time, but to fix the systemic holes that let people fall through the cracks. The decision was no longer about me. It was about the legacy of service, the lessons of Martha, and the future of healthcare. The acceptance letter for the senator's committee position sat on my desk, crisp and formal, next to a stack of surgical reports. It was an invitation to a new kind of power, a responsibility that felt heavy but exhilarating. It was the perfect counterpoint to the life Hayes had scripted for me. He had demanded I talk about the weather. Now I would be debating national policy. Standing in my office, looking at the letter, I thought about that woman on the dance floor 1 year ago, the one who'd leaned in for a kiss and received public humiliation instead. She had been so desperate for connection that she'd ignored every warning sign, every red flag, every moment of cruelty disguised as humor. She had needed to be destroyed for this woman to emerge. Hayes's cruelty hadn't broken me. It had broken the shell I didn't know I was living in. His public rejection had forced me to reject the life I'd been accepting, the constant diminishment I'd been normalizing. I finally understood the distinction. The old me saw my career as something to be managed so it wouldn't offend my husband. The new me saw my career as a tool to save not just lives, but dignity. My work with the Martha Puey Foundation continued to thrive, its mission gaining national visibility. Judith secured a major feature in a financial magazine, detailing her decision to turn in her own son, giving the foundation immense credibility. She was fearless, embracing the role of the righteous matriarch. It's amazing what happens when you stop being polite and start being honest, Judith told me over lunch one day. I spent 30 years maintaining a standard I hated. Now I have my own standard, accountability. This concept of setting one's own standard became the driving force of my life. Hayes had weaponized the word standards to control me. I was now reclaiming it to define myself. My standard was precision, integrity, and service to those who could not fight for themselves. I thought about Amanda's upcoming book, Standards, and her dedication to exposing predatory men in the workplace. I thought about Meredith now excelling in law school and Margaret dedicating her retirement to teaching financial literacy. The destruction Hayes had wrought had, ironically, given rise to a powerful network of determined women who were now actively fixing the systems he had exploited. We were the living, breathing evidence that a betrayal of trust could be converted into a legacy of action. My personal life was, for the first time, purely mine. I dated sparingly, carefully, but without desperation. When I did meet someone, I was transparent about my past and my purpose. I looked for respect and equality, not validation or security. The need to be chosen, to be deemed good enough by someone else, had vanished. One evening, I met Leo for dinner, a completely platonic, professional debrief on the federal monitoring of Hayes's assets. The restitution hearing is set for next quarter, Leo confirmed. We've managed to secure 80% of the principal for the Oak Hill clients, including Martha. Your documentation was key. That's excellent news, Leo. 80% is a victory. He looked at me, a genuine, appreciative look. You know, I remember seeing you at that party a year and a half ago, before all this broke. You were standing by the bar, talking to Reese's wife, Talia. You looked distant, like you were observing a species you didn't belong to. I admitted. I was living someone else's script, pretending I didn't have a full life outside of the role of wife of Hayes Hartley. I was embarrassed of my own success because he convinced me it was inconvenient. You stopped apologizing for it, Leo observed. That's the most powerful thing I've witnessed in this entire case. Hayes wanted to reduce you to an ornament, and you responded by becoming a fortress. His words resonated deeply. I hadn't just survived, I had fortified myself. I was a fortress of self-worth, built on the solid foundation of my accomplishments and my moral compass. I signed the senator's committee acceptance letter that night, using the same steady hands that had saved the senator's daughter, that had packed Hayes's belongings, and that had held the microphone at countless speaking engagements where I told the truth about marriages that looked perfect from the outside but were crime scenes within. The woman who had stood frozen on that dance floor was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that real power didn't come from being chosen or validated or included. It came from choosing yourself, validating your own worth, and including your own voice in the conversations that truly mattered. This was my self-chosen standard, and it was the only one that mattered. The final pieces of my life, realignment fell into place with a quiet, satisfying click, far removed from the crashing, dramatic noise of the penthouse party. My work with Senator Walsh's Healthcare Policy Committee began to consume my time. It was demanding, requiring a different kind of surgical precision, one applied to bureaucracy and legislation. We were focused on lowering prescription drug costs for seniors and increasing access to specialized cardiac care in underserved, rural communities. Every victory, no matter how small, felt monumental, knowing I was translating my expertise from the operating table to the entire healthcare system. My commitment to the Martha Puey Foundation only deepened. Working alongside Judith, who had become a true mentor and advocate, we successfully lobbied for a state bill, dubbed the Dignity Act, that created stricter oversight for financial advisors handling retirement accounts, largely inspired by the very fraud Hayes had orchestrated. "The irony is delicious, Alara," Judith told me after the bill passed, raising a glass of sparkling cider. "My son's downfall created a safety net for thousands of retirees." "It's the best kind of revenge, Judith," I replied. "A systemic one." Hayes's appeal was summarily denied, and his 7-year sentence stood firm. He was gone, a bitter memory that served only as a cautionary tale in my public speeches. The legal and emotional ties were severed, leaving me completely free to focus on my life's true purpose. I sold the Lincoln Park house, the glass box that had been more of a mausoleum than a home. I bought a sun-drenched condo near the lake, smaller, warmer, and filled with my own choices, comfortable furniture, my extensive medical library, and a clear view of the city I now actively served. It was a space that celebrated autonomy, not performance. One late spring afternoon, I found myself back at Northwestern Memorial, not in scrubs, but in a tailored dress suit on my way to a committee meeting. I passed the pediatric ward, stopping by the room of a young boy recovering from a complex heart defect. His mother was there, and she looked up, smiling. "Dr. Morrison, thank you again. He's leaving tomorrow. Going home." "That's wonderful news," I said, genuinely happy. As I walked away, I thought of the new monitoring equipment the ward had finally received, paid for through a large, anonymous donation made by the Martha Puey Foundation. The money Hayes had scoffed at, the $30,000 for life-saving equipment, had been paid 10 times over, sourced from a purpose that transcended mere ambition. This was the end of the performance, the end of pretending to be less than I was. I stepped onto the elevator, no longer the accessory, no longer the robot surgeon, no longer the victim. I was Alara Morrison, the surgeon, the advocate, the policymaker, the co-founder of a justice initiative. My worth was self-determined, my standards were high, and they had nothing to do with what fit neatly into a social script. Hayes's cruelty had given me the sharpest lesson of all, that the only person whose standards you need to meet are your own. Some words sting, others heal, but the truest words, the ones that cut the deepest, are the ones we finally say to ourselves. I deserve better. I am enough. I choose me. What I want you to take away from my story isn't the satisfying feeling of revenge, but the profound necessity of self-rescue. For years, I ignored the red flags, the gaslighting, the control, the disrespect, because I was performing CPR on a dead marriage, clinging to the idea of a partnership. Whether you are 25 and starting out or 55 and nearing retirement, please know this. The most expensive asset you own is your peace of mind and your financial security. If a partner or a professional makes you feel small, demands you diminish your success, or asks you to ignore obvious truths, they're not your partner. They're your cage builder. Your greatest power is your ability to walk away, fully documented and without apology. The moment I stopped trying to please him was the moment I started winning. My question for you, what is one red flag you've been explaining away, either in a relationship or a business dealing? And what is the first documented step you can take today to protect your future self? Thank you for letting me share this intensely personal, life-changing journey with you. Remember to hit that like button if this story of reclamation resonated with you, and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and accountability. Take care of yourselves and never be silent.